Welcome to PR Talk, sponsored by the PRSA of Oregon. This is your host, Amy Rosenberg, founder of Veracity and author of A Modern Guide to Public Relations. Help other people find our podcast by subscribing, rating, giving us a review, or sharing on social media. Thanks for tuning in. Hi, I have Robert Johnson here. He's the Strategic Communications Officer with Riester Public Affairs and the host of two podcasts, the PR Nation and Public Health Review. Hi, Robert.
Woohoo! Hey, Amy. That was the fanfare right there.
Yeah, thanks for joining us. I think you're all the way out in D.C., right?
All the way out in D.C. It's a long way from where you are.
Yeah, but I think we do have listeners all over, but I think most of them reside in the Pacific Northwest. But and that's why I'm really interested to talk to you, because you live in DC, and so you have a lot of political communications experience. And I was just reflecting that we haven't had anyone focus on public affairs on the podcast before. So today I just kind of want to dig into the difference between public affairs and PR. And in doing so, we can talk about your past experience as press secretary and whatnot. And then later, hopefully, we'll have time to dig into podcasting and radio, because you also have a focus in that area as well. So, let's just dig into public affairs.
Okay.
So what is the difference, I guess, between, it's a really basic question, but so in the Northwest, a lot of us have not worked in public affairs because, I would assume in DC, a lot of people are focusing on public affairs, but in Oregon, we just don't have as much experience there. So what would you say the differences are, if there are any?
I think everyone defines these terms a little bit differently, but to me, the difference between public relations and public affairs has to do with the kind of work you're doing, especially in government policy and government relations. I think everybody does PR, but then there's this offshoot called public affairs, and it really crosses over into government work, supporting lobbyists, lawyers, those sorts of things. And to me, that's the difference. So PR, you're pitching a product maybe, and in public affairs, you're probably more likely pitching a policy.
Mm-hmm. And so when you pitch a policy, how do you go about doing that? Is that kind of the same way, like, oh, let's write a press release? Or is it more like, no, let's connect with these decision makers, and what do you do from there?
I think it's pretty much the same. You need to know who your audience is, and you need to know how to reach them, what the best channel is for connecting, and then you need to have a message. So, I've done PR for Circle K and 76 Gas. I've done PR for recycling programs and Ride Your Bike to Work Day and all of these things, and also in the federal government after 9/11 for the Transportation Security Administration, when we were standing up the defenses, if you will, to protect transportation from future terrorist attacks. It's all the same. You need to have those basics nailed, and then you just go to work. I think one thing that is different is the turnaround. I've done a lot of political campaigns also, and those are very high stress, high output events. You're really working at a different speed, and you might have 3 or 4 different outreach efforts to the media in a single day. Your message may change from the morning to the night. That doesn't happen normally in PR. You make a plan and you stick to the plan, and maybe you tweak the plan. In public affairs and then in those political areas, those environments, you end up really moving at breakneck speed most of the time. So I think that is a little bit different, but otherwise it's exactly the same.
Oh, okay. I do think that what could be interesting or different is talking to how do you reach these decision makers, like the lobbyists and whatnot? Are you using the news to do that, or is it sit down meetings, or all of the above?
I'm using the media less and less because they have a one-track mind more so now than ever. If you're not on the national story, you might as well forget trying to get their attention. For us, we have encouraged our clients to do more of their own storytelling, and the democratization of the internet has allowed that to take place. Now you can be your own newspaper publisher, your own radio broadcaster, your own television journalist. You can do all of these things yourself online. You have to know how to target those audiences, and there are lots of ways to do that. It's all over the place. Some of it involves technology, and some of it involves good old-fashioned list building. For us, we've tried to take people more to that brand journalism space, cutting out the media filter. You still have to deal with the media because they're there. But to me, if you want to tell a story these days, you need to go direct to your audience and use all of these amazing tools and all of the amazing talent that's now available to help tell stories and to create your own set of journalism channels and outreach pathways to get to folks.
Mm-hmm. I love that. So you are talking about podcasts, right? And possibly content marketing and social media. But I just want to focus a little bit on podcasting here because it looks like you have a specialty in podcasting yourself, being the host of 2 shows. And then it looks like your company offers putting together podcasts for clients. Is that correct?
That's right. We spend a lot of time creating audio content. We've just started offering video podcast work as well. And it all stems from our background as broadcast journalists. So a few of us have done this work in the news business a long time ago, but it doesn't change really. The techniques are still the same. The delivery channels are quite a bit different today. We use those to our advantage now to help get those messages out. And, it's tough for a client to be able to figure this out. They need someone to help them do it and to help them do it well. That's what we do on a regular basis now. It is a significant piece of our annual revenue.
Mm-hmm. Well, it's a lot of work putting together a podcast. I've had a few clients try it, and it's just they can't keep executing it. But for me, the trick is and you mentioned this before, how do you get your audience to review or listen to your podcast or read your blogs? That to me sounds like a kind of a tricky thing. So can you talk about how you do that? And then you also mentioned list building. So what tools are you using for list building?
Well, I think whenever we take on a project, we like to know whether the client has an established following. That's number one. We know that if you do, then the project will get off to a better start. So you have a membership or you have a list you've already built. You know how to get a hold of people who are interested in what you do. That gets you off the blocks and on your way. From there, we can go into some of the other things that are not groundbreaking. They're out there for anybody to use however they choose to tell their story. We can use the news media to do that. We can use social media. We can use geo-targeting if there are people in certain lines of work at certain buildings that we want to make sure know about our content. We can go about trying to build lists. There's just a lot of different ways that we can start to build a community around this content. The best way, though, to do it is to create a good product, to have patience, and to build the relationship that allows people who are listening right away to recommend it to others. That's the number one way to build an audience. So it does take time, but we have had some success with it in a number of treatments. So there really isn't, I guess, Amy, a one-size-fits-all approach to this. It really kind of depends on who you're talking to, what they want to talk about, where they're starting, and how much they're willing to do, how patient they're willing to be as well.
Mm-hmm. That's a key sometimes. So you do have radio experience and TV experience working on the inside. So how do you think podcasting has changed the dynamic of radio in general, if at all?
Radio is still very popular. A lot of people still in their cars, a lot of people still listening at home. Podcasting is radio on demand, essentially. So it's like Netflix, which started all of this, right? I, unfortunately, am old enough to remember when you had to be in front of the TV on Tuesday night at 7 p.m. in order to see that show you were interested in. It was only on once a week, and if you weren't there, you missed it. Of course, you don't have to do that now. Now you can phone it in, you can sleep over, you can check out for months on end and then come back to the show and it's waiting for you. That's what podcasting is now in many respects. We do a lot of shows that tie more to what's going on now, but even there, those are still on demand. You don't have to carve out a particular time during your day to meet that content. It's there waiting for you. If you like it early in the morning or late at night, whenever you want it, it's available. So it's radio, and a lot of radio stations are moving into it. iHeartRadio owns practically every radio station in the country, and they are huge podcasters. Spotify, Amazon, all of these music and content creation companies that are so huge, they are all doing it now because they realize everyone wants this content or that content on their schedule. They don't want to be told when they have to listen.
Yeah. So do you think that PR people should pitch iHeartRadio's podcasts rather than their radio news shows?
I think you should do both.
Is it all the same? Sometimes it's all the same.
It depends. I think you should do both. If the audience is there and you need that audience and you've got something that show, whether it's a live terrestrial radio station style operation, the kind of station that has an antenna, or it's a podcast operated by that station, you should pitch it. Just make sure that you know how the podcast works, because some podcasts are all about guests and others have no guests at all. And you'd be amazed at how many people, I think maybe you even wrote about this in your book, as I recall. I was
Thank you for remembering.
Yeah. I think, it's worth knowing who you're talking to. And a lot of people in this business forget about that. So it's all the same. The tech is there, the cool toys are there, the tools are available. The work we can do now is limited only by our imagination and maybe by a client and their budget. But otherwise, everything that we do now is pretty much done the same way I did it when I first took a PR job in Congress in 1985.
Okay. Yeah. Let's go back to that. I want to talk about your past political experience and just tell us, what it was like to be a press secretary. It sounds so fancy. I don't really know.
Yeah. Well, do you have time machine music you could play right now? Like
Maybe we'll overlay it. Yeah.
Well, 1985 was a long time ago, and there are probably many people listening to your podcast who were not alive then. Maybe their parents were barely alive then, too. But it was a good time back in those days. We had lemonade on the porch No, that's a different story.
It's like, I don't know if we're that young. I don't think I'm drawing my children to listen to this. But
we wore straw hats and rode horses everywhere. No, the press secretary job was great. I was 20 years old when I did that and way in over my head, but didn't know it, and so was able to fake my way into the job and ended up being fairly successful at it. It was a different time, though. Think about this. There was no social media, no mobile device, no cell phone. The fax machine was barely available, and it cost $20,000, and you needed two of them, one on each end. So a $40,000 fax machine set up to send a piece of paper over the line, and it was a phone line. A lot different. So I mailed all of my news releases. I would get it approved, print it out, take it next door to the Alpha Graphics, which I don't even know if those are around anymore. I would have 100 of them printed. I would print my sticky labels. I would Z-fold them, stuff them by hand, stick the labels on, and take them to the post office.
Yeah, I do remember the mail. We did. Yeah, I remember the mail. We did mail, but internet was kind of coming on when I got my first job, and checking email was kind of like, you just do it on a schedule. It's not a big deal, which is, so it's probably how it should be now too. So I want to ask you.
Well, we had to talk to each other too, Amy.
Well,
that was the other thing. You had to use a phone.
Yeah, and that's what
all
I want
the time.
Well, I really want to ask you about this. I sometimes think that when we didn't have email and cell phones and we didn't have to make a time to chat, let's schedule every second of our day, was that a little easier? I mean, I sometimes want to go back to the Mad Men era just to live in that, not for the way the women were treated, I'll just say, be the man in the Mad Men era, I kind of want to try that.
The clothes were nice. You got to admit, the fashions were pretty cool.
Yeah, and the martinis
Everybody
at
smoked,
lunch.
though. Everybody smoked, though. That's not good for you, but that's another story. I think it definitely made the day less predictable. It was one of those deals where you came to work and you didn't know what was going to happen necessarily. Nobody really had calendars. You had paper schedules that you would keep. The PC was all we had, and it wasn't very well developed either. There was no such thing as Windows or a system like you get on a Mac now, with graphics and clicks and buttons and all of that. There were no mouses, no mice, on computers. So it was the dark ages. And the stuff that I used then is in the Smithsonian now, truly.
But you're really dating yourself here.
1985, 36 years ago. But that meant you had to have relationships with people. You had to talk to them and get to know them. And so for media, that was how we did it. I knew every reporter that I worked with. I saw them outside of work. I played softball with them on teams on weekends. And talk to them a lot all day long on the phone. Sometimes I would see them in person. I would hand deliver the news releases to the media in Tucson, and I would try to get them to come to the front desk to talk to me for a minute, and a lot of them would. I would go on these long 4 and 5 day road trips by myself through southern Arizona, stopping and paying visits to all the media in my district. Had about 125 media, and I would drive around about once every 4 or 5 months. And even though I talked to them almost every day, I would go see them like a shoe salesman. I didn't have a story I wanted them to run. I would just go say hello.
And how do you think that helped?
Oh, yeah, absolutely it did. I could get anything done that I needed for my member of Congress. Anything. And I just kind of fantasize more about that thing okay, I have a question for my client. I might call them and they might actually pick up. And then I could have just a 2-minute conversation and get the question answered. Then I can get the little thing I'm doing done and be done with it. That. Those are my little, Mad Men fantasies. So I'm wondering, I just think that it might be easier to work that way. But you're also saying, well, then we can't schedule, we can't plan ahead. So maybe not. You would just drop in on people in those days, but it's so much more competitive now. The news cycles turn around every minute. People are eating each other's lunch. They are judged on the clicks that they get for the stories they post, even in big places like the Washington Post. So they don't have time to sit around and chitty chat, right? They just need to know what you can do for them right now. And if it happens to fit in with the narrative that they've been ordered to go out and follow, then you might get in. The stuff that I was doing back in those days, it just doesn't happen today. All of those media outlets that I went and visited, I would say 90% of them are out of business. They're gone now.
Yeah,
they've been swallowed up or shut down because they're just not profitable. People have gone away. The social media channels have kicked the small town radio, TV, and newspaper people out the door because they just don't have the ability to monetize that the way they used to when they sold advertising, when they were the only thing in town. If you're in the middle of nowhere, Arizona, you can get satellite radio now.
Mm-hmm.
You don't need the little AM radio station playing records.
Mm-hmm. So, and this is kind of what you were talking about, how you've switched your strategy for many clients to also focus on owned channels that they can control.
Right. You want to be able to do that, I think, because it's more and more going that way. The media has made itself an advocate in many ways, and that's fine. It is what it is. I come from an era when journalists were supposed to be impartial, and they were not supposed to advocate, and they certainly were not the star of the show like they are today. Mm-hmm. So if you consider the media is more of a business, just like your business, Amy, or the business that my wife and I own and operate with partners here in Washington, D.C., then you can approach the media in an entirely different way. They are a channel. They are not the only channel. They are not the channel that takes you to the promised land. They are a channel. If it works for you to engage them, then do it. Otherwise, just do your own thing. And that's where we're trying to take people now, because they are doing their own thing. They do what they want to do. They always have. I was a journalist. I worked in TV and radio newsrooms. I wrote for United Press International when I was a kid. So I've been around those newsrooms and know a lot of media people. And I think the media needs to be an active part of American democracy. But I'm not enthralled with them the way I was 30 or 40 years ago, because they have changed the rules of the game. And so to me, when I get a client who now wants to get their story out, I say, let's just do it ourselves. We're old journalists. We know how to do that, and we can put it together, and you're going to like the outcome a lot better.
I love that. It's also more rewarding. You feel like there is possibly an end to the work a little bit, and you can create a lot of projects where there's a beginning, middle, and an end for one client. So it's not like you're ending the work for the client, but at least you can feel like there's a little bit of closure with some of the projects with owned media. But I wanted to ask you what has changed. You are talking about what has changed, in the media landscape. But I'm wondering about, focusing on political affairs. Well, how has that changed with the political unrest and COVID and so many things going on in our world?
We do almost all of our work in health and public health. So for us, we've gotten extremely busy. The industries that are not related to the pandemic have found it to be a much rougher road. So it's a little hard for me to talk about how the pandemic has affected our business, other than to say that we have seen explosive growth in the amount of work that we've been doing since all of this started in March of 2020. But again, because we were already leading clients toward this brand journalism approach, even if we don't have a story that ties to the pandemic, we are okay, because the audiences, despite what the media thinks, are interested in other stories. They are interested in other news. So we just give it to them. We let the media do their thing, and when it suits us, we engage that. And when it doesn't suit us, we go engage our audiences on our own terms. So again, it kind of makes, if you're able to get this stood up with your clients, it makes your program, your communication program, a little more bulletproof in a sense, because you're less susceptible to the changes swirling around you. Now, sometimes you may want to dial back. It might not be a good time to be out selling a product when people are dying in record numbers. Maybe there are other considerations that cause you to kind of tune or dial it down a little bit for a while. But in terms of your options, if you have your own program running, those options are still available to you if they are appropriate.
Okay. So 2 final questions dealing with health specifically. So I guess the first question is not a question, it's just a statement that I noticed that your company won an award for, I think it was a mask commercial for COVID-19, something with wearing masks. Is that correct?
Yeah, we did an ad last year for one of our clients, the Association of State and Territorial Health Officials, and it was about wearing masks and how people can have differences in their personalities, in their approaches, in their mask designs, but in the end, we all come together for the same cause, or we should anyway, and that is to keep people healthy.
Mm-hmm. Great. Well, thank you for your public service there. And then finally, I just think it's just super interesting that your company focuses on health, and here you are, the host of the Public Health Review podcast. And so how did that materialize, and how does that help everything you're trying to do?
Well, that show's been on for 3.5 years now. As a matter of fact, we just recently launched a daily show for them.
Oh, okay.
Every morning now at 7 a.m., we do 5 to 6 minutes of news about public health as seen through the client's lens. So we're busy. We're producing 2 shows for them, and we are completely in the middle of this public health response in terms of communicating it, giving voice to the people who are working to try and battle all of the variants and the back and forth that takes place over masks and vaccines and all this other stuff. It's been great, to be able to contribute there. It reminds me of coming to Washington after 9/11 and being involved in that effort to secure transportation against future terrorist attacks. It's the same sort of public service, in my view.
Yeah, that's amazing. And again, probably very rewarding. Well, thank you for your time, and thank you for your service.
Thanks for listening to the PR Talk podcast. Find Amy's book, A Modern Guide to Public Relations, plus more PR Talk episodes at prtalk.co. And remember to subscribe, rate, and review.